Welcome in, Braves Today, bravestoday.com. He's Lindsay Crosby. I'm Ben Taylor, brought to you by Active Wealth Management. Go to Annuity 360 for your free book. And a new sponsor, Plains Coffee, is hopefully now with them on board. Lindsay, if you know anybody within the company, we would love to have maybe some free coffee, maybe some free samples to sip on, so I'm not stuck drinking this water all the time whenever we're visiting. So we shall see. As Lindsay we entered the end of the offseason, the biggest question it has been, besides, are you going to get more pitching? Because that's what everybody always jumps in the comments, even when we talk about any sort of position player, is are we done yet? And the reason I ask that is because right now, only 36 slots of the 40 are filled, 3 of which are going to have guys that start out on injured reserve. And so they're not going to be active whatsoever. So, and of that 40, only 12 are position players. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, Atlanta's done the main heavy lifting in the offseason. We just passed Christmas. Let me use a Christmas analogy. You've bought all of the gifts that are going under the tree. Maybe you've got a couple small things you have to get to pop into stockings, but for all of the big stuff has been purchased. You're done for the most part. You're like one target run away from being done with Christmas. Atlanta still has things they have to go out and do, right? Obviously, you mentioned depth in the high minors. You've got to fill out the 40-man roster. It is not a priority, but you do need to go find preferably a right-handed hitting outfielder, hopefully a veteran, in case you have some sort of injury. You're not relying on Forrest Wall to be the starter. But all of the heavy lifting's done. You added a rotation piece that you feel comfortable letting start in the postseason if it gets to that. You added a everyday left fielder versus what you've had recently where it's been kind of a revolving door of different options the last couple seasons. You re-signed 2 bullpen pieces. You added a couple guys via trade and free agency, and you have fortified that bullpen now. I mean, you've done all of the big things that had to be checked off, no matter what Jim Bowden or folks at The Athletic might say. You've done most of the work of the offseason. You just have little, like you said, little things around the margin to fill out the roster, but nobody who portends to be a difference maker if everything goes according to plan for Atlanta.
Well, I call it recency bias because, of course, everybody said, well, you got to go get pitching. Well, they went and they got a pitcher. And the reason I say
maybe 2 with Lopez.
And maybe 2 with Lopez. And the thing is when I say, yes, it's always good to have a healthy bullpen and to look out for people. But I want to remind everybody that there were a couple of guys that didn't get to pitch in the postseason due to injury. And so those guys are back this year, so they will be regular starters. And you just mentioned the big thing that everybody says, well, you got to find a left fielder. Well, we got a left fielder. So I get it. I get that only 12 players are position players. But those that keep saying, including writers that are doing this, saying Atlanta still needs another big piece. Well, a big piece is not going to come to sit on the bench. And that's essentially what everybody wants, is a big name to come. Well, where are you going to put the big name? Every position all the starters are filled right now. So including some backups that are sitting there as well, that are already in line to back somebody up. So I'm with you. I think if it's a right-handed or right-hitting outfielder, yes, or maybe some sort of utility player that can play all over the place, whether it be infield or outfield or third or outfield, whatever. But everybody that keeps claiming Atlanta hasn't done enough, you need to go get more. I mean, walk me through that. How do you bring somebody in to say, hey, I know that you played here and you were very good, and we're bringing you in for $12, $15 million. You're not going to see the field.
Yeah, I mean, looking at where Atlanta's sitting money-wise, as far as being close to that third CBT threshold, and then looking at the few top pitchers that have been traded this offseason. Really, it's Howard Glasnow. That's really about it as far as guys who have been moved. Atlanta doesn't, that's really the only place you could add a big name. And even then, it's going to be at best to be your 5th starter. And this team is good. I don't want to keep making them feel bad, but Seattle Mariners are familiar with this. Their GM talked about this. All you have to do is make the postseason. You win 54% of the games. You're, for the most part, you're going to be in the postseason. And then from there, it's whatever happens, happens. This team is a postseason team either way. And some of the moves they've made, like adding Sale, are more about October than they are the regular season. But there's nobody, one, out there that both financially and playing time wise fits into Atlanta's current plans and current roster. And I mean, I understand the urge to like, okay, we've got to do some sort of big splash because we're disappointed with how last year ended. But you've done a lot of really good work to make this roster on a long-term basis much better, because you've got, I mean, your next guy starter hitting free agency is 3 years from now at shortstop. Yeah. I mean, there's not much else you can do other than, way overpay for a big name that doesn't have a spot to play or doesn't have guaranteed space. Like, it's pitching. That's what this is. It's pitching. Like, that's why people are complaining. They want a big name pitcher, and there's just not been big name pitchers that either have already signed or that have been available for Atlanta to go out and get. And so they made a trade instead to get Sale and kept their top prospects, which I've been beating this drum of, you're going to need those guys in the rotation eventually. You need to keep them here. So it feels like it's complaining for the sake of complaining, really.
Well, that's it. And it doesn't help that some of the national writers are looking at it and they're not real sure what to say about it. So they just go, oh, they're not done yet. Yeah. It's brought to you by Active Wealth Management. Go to annuity360.net for your free book. Thank Ford and the crew for being a part of this. Call Ford today, your nationwide peak of 10 illustrations, so you can get and learn how to get 20% immediate income account bonus, as well as 8% annual interest in growth. ActiveWealth.com is where you can find Ford. Learn how you can work with Ford and his Active Wealth team. You'll be glad you did. You can also give them a call, 770-685-1777. That's 770-685-1777. As Lindsay, you mentioned just a moment ago, the gentleman from The Athletic, former GM as well, and he gave a B+ to so far on the offseason. I did want to expound on that a little bit, as I don't understand how the B+ is handed out when there's just not a whole lot to add. That's like basically, I mean, of course, he gives the Dodgers an A, but I mean,
all it takes to get an A is $1 billion, apparently.
That's going to say, you spend $1 billion, you should get an A. I mean, if I gave my teachers in college $1 billion, I probably would have had much better grades than what I had when I got out. So I think that's the obvious choice. But when you look at, I mean, I guess B+ is not bad, but I just don't know why it wasn't something like an A-, because we went from a platooning left fielder to now we have a left fielder that is out there solidly. And so it's basically a lineup that you will see the same every single day.
Yeah, and reading Jim Bowden's comments, I think there's a little more clarity as to why he downgraded it a little bit. And it kind of comes back to Chris Sale isn't the ace that he was. Mm-hmm. And there's still some questions about Kelenic and maybe necessarily exactly where he will, how he will perform next year. And so at least there's some explanation there behind why it's a B+ versus an A. And it's because there are still some questions. Like, you got a person for left field, but there is this lingering, which version of Jared Kelenic is the real Jared Kelenic, the first part of his career, the second, like that last season before he got hurt. What's the real guy? I get that at least a little bit, but and he did acknowledge that Atlanta's been very creative and very resourceful. And it feels like he at least understood what Atlanta was trying to do. A lot of the other stuff has been, we don't know what they're doing. It's obvious what they're doing. They're taking advantage of the fact that these other teams are trying to shed payroll, and they're saying, we'll take those bad contracts if you give us this thing that we want. Like, it's very obvious what Atlanta's doing. Just because not everybody does this doesn't mean that it's that hard to figure out. But again, when you have a national perspective, sometimes you don't take the time to dig into it and say, oh, that's what they did with all those guys. They took all these guys and, yeah, that guy got traded to somebody else because they wanted to get rid of the contract. It's not really that hard to figure out if you actually look at it. It's just most people don't do that.
Well, and plus they saved two arms that were up on the chopping block as far as everybody else was concerned, because even people that reached out said, I want your two guys that are in your farm system so we can use them in a couple of years. And Alex Anthopoulos is like, no,
No.
that's our plan. We plan on using them in a couple of years. So I thought that was almost one of the biggest wins of the offseason is being able to keep those two within the organization.
If we are going to go back to last season and talk about adding getting Max Fried back from injury is like adding a starter at the trade deadline, then keeping those two prospects and having them enter the lineup full time for 2025 or enter the rotation full time for 25 will be like Atlanta going out and signing two pitchers in free agency. I mean, it's the exact same concept. If you're going to say last year adding Fried was like adding a free agent, then okay, or a trade acquisition at the deadline, then okay, keeping these two prospects is like signing two starters next offseason.
No, I couldn't agree more. Big thanks to our new sponsor, Plains Coffee. You can go to plainscoffee.com and you can get more information there on how you can get involved. Hey, and we're here to save you a little money as well. They serve a ton of different types of coffees. If you go to the website, you'll see. I really want to try the Cinnabon coffee, by the way, which I thought that would have been trademarked, but apparently not. But they got different types. Sure to love, online, easy checkout, ships right to your door. All beans, whole beans, that is, all roasted the day before shipping. So you're guaranteed fresh coffee in your mailbox or at your doorstep. Also, they have teas. You can go to plainscoffee.com. Also, if you are listening to this right now, be sure to enter the promo code BRAVES. That ought to be pretty easy for you to do. Enter the promo code BRAVES, and you will get 10% off your order when it comes straight to your door at Plains Coffee. Go to plainscoffee.com. All right. Finally, Lindsay, I wanted to ask you is you wrote an article on Luis Guillorme. I'm going to get it right here. Yeah. I'm going to get it right here in a little bit. And what the Braves are getting. And honestly, the coolest thing that they're getting is the guy that caught the bat on the player that let it go out of his hands, and he caught it and then threw it back into play, and he never flinched. So he's at least as cool as the other side of the pillow, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, I did make a point to put that that video into the article because it's like, hey, he's got great hands. See, he caught a flying bat from the dugout. No, signing Luis Guillorme to me was, okay, you needed to find some sort of veteran who could play across your infield. You had David Fletcher. You still have David Fletcher in the organization. He's not on the 40-man roster, so he's technically in AAA Gwinnett. But Luis Guillorme, $1.1 million. He's been an above-average defender at all of the non-first positions that he's played, at second, at third, and at shortstop. Last year, had a little bit of injury, but other than that, he's been a useful player for the Mets. They just had to kind of free up some play time for all of these young guys that they have. They've got two different prospects at third. They've got just a bunch of guys they had to find play time for. Offensively, doesn't really have a ton of power, but career 260 hitter. Not terrible against lefties, so it's not like you're going to have a black hole on offense when you face a lefty pitcher. And so if he has to get extended run, which you never want that to happen, but 2 years ago with Ozzie Albies, last year with Arcia being hurt for a little while, he's a guy that, bad name or not, it's not going to hurt you. He doesn't strike out a ton. He doesn't chase a ton. He at least make pitchers attack him in the zone, and he puts a bat on a ball in the zone. And so not really much else you can ask for from a guy who's going to make $1 million. I mean, that's all he's making. And from what I've heard is he's a good dude. I mean, just a nice, always liked by and respected by his teammates in the clubhouse. That's a big thing to Atlanta. So you get a veteran. My hope is that now Atlanta can maybe find a taker for David Fletcher because he's owed like $6 million this year and $6.5 million next year. It's probably not going to happen, but would be nice if you could find someone to take that money, take him off your hands. But if not, you can keep him in the minors. He's still depth for you, and you can call him up if you need to. He's your backup option if Guillorme is also unavailable.
We shall see, as we're less than a month away from seeing pitchers and catchers that are going to be well, legit going to be there. They're already there. Is the last pod, those of you who had a chance to listen, heard Lindsay talk about it, who guys are already throwing and trying to strengthen their arms right now. It's not like they just show up the day that pitchers and catchers report. And hopefully they don't show up out of shape. Hopefully they show up in shape. We shall see. It's been brought to you by Active Wealth Management. Go to annuity360.net for your free book, or you can head over to plainscoffee.com and use the promo code BRAVES for your 10% off. He's Lindsay Crosby. I'm Ben Taylor. Lindsay, as always, I greatly appreciate it, sir.
Thanks, buddy.